Imagine a cave in Siberia. It's cold. The wind howls outside. Deep inside, for thousands of years, the ground has been collecting layers of dirt and debris. Bones of cave bears and hyenas, stone tools left by ancient hands, and in 2008, a tiny piece of bone no bigger than a child's pinky tip. It didn't look like much. For a long time, no one knew what it was. It was just another fragment from the deep past, cataloged and stored away. But that tiny bone held a secret. It held a ghost. A ghost that lived not in the cave, but inside our own DNA. That bone belonged to a person from a lost branch of the human family. We call them the Denisovans. Their story isn't one of grand fossil discoveries like the famous skeletons of Neanderthals. We don't have a complete Denisovan skull to look at. We can't reconstruct their bodies with any certainty. For the most part, we know them through genetics. They are the first group of extinct humans to be discovered almost entirely through the mapping of their genome. The science that revealed them is incredible. It's like finding a single letter from a lost novel and being able to reconstruct the entire book, its characters, and its plot. The story starts with that pinky bone from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains. Researchers sent it to Svante Paabo's lab at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Old Paabo and his team were pioneers in the field of ancient DNA. Getting a genetic code from something tens of thousands of years old is hard. New DNA is a fragile molecule. It breaks down over time. It gets contaminated by the DNA of bacteria, fungi, and even the archaeologists who handle the bones. It's like trying to read a shredded, waterlogged book that's been buried in mud for a century. But their techniques were getting better and better. They had successfully sequenced the Neanderthal genome, a huge achievement. They expected this little finger bone to be from a Neanderthal too, since Neanderthal remains were also found in the cave. They extracted the mitochondrial DNA first. It's a smaller piece of the genetic code passed down from the mother, and there are many copies of it in each cell, making it easier to find. They sequenced it, and then they stared at the results. It wasn't Neanderthal. And it wasn't modern human, it was something else entirely. It was so different that its last common ancestor with us, and Neanderthals lived maybe 1 million years ago. It was a shock. This was a new type of human, unknown to science. To be sure, they needed to sequence the full genome, the complete genetic blueprint from the nucleus of the cell. This was a much bigger task, but the cold, dry conditions of Denisova Cave had preserved the DNA remarkably well. They succeeded. The full genome confirmed it. This individual, a young girl they nicknamed Denny, belonged to a sister group to the Neanderthals. They had split from the Neanderthal lineage hundreds of thousands of years after our ancestors had split from them both. Imagine a family tree. Far back, a branch split off, leading to modern humans, Homo sapiens. The other branch continued for a while, then it split again. One fork led to the Neanderthals. The other led to this new group, the Denisovans, 3 distinct human groups living on the planet at the same time. This was a huge deal. The story of human evolution had always been drawn as a simple line, one species replacing another. But the reality was much messier, much more interesting. It was less like a line and more like a tangled bush, with branches that grew, met, and sometimes intertwined. The Denisovans were a major new branch we never knew existed, but who were they? The genome was a complete instruction manual, but we had almost no idea what the finished product looked like. The physical evidence was, and still is, incredibly scarce. For years, all we had was that one pinky bone and a few large molars found in the same cave. The teeth were huge, much bigger, and more robust than Neanderthal or modern human teeth. They looked more primitive, like teeth from much older hominins like Homo erectus. It was a strange mismatch, an archaic-looking tooth with a unique, advanced genome inside it. Then, another piece of the puzzle surfaced, not in a lab, but in a monastery. A Tibetan monk had found a strange jawbone in a cave on the Tibetan plateau in 1980. He gave it to a Buddhist master who eventually passed it on to scientists. The jaw was massive. It had the same kind of huge, primitive-looking teeth as the ones from Denisova Cave. And the bone was too old, and the environment wasn't as kind as the Siberian cave. For decades, it remained a mystery, but science has more than one trick. Instead of looking for DNA, researchers looked for proteins. Proteins can survive for much longer than DNA. They analyzed the collagen in the jawbone's teeth, and they found a match. The protein sequence was Denisovan. This was enormous. It meant the Denisovans weren't just living in the mountains of Siberia. They were also living on the Tibetan plateau, over 10,000 feet up. This was the first time a Denisovan fossil had been found outside of Denisova Cave. It suggested a vast range, and it suggested they were adapted to living in extreme high altitude environments, a place where the air is thin and oxygen is scarce. More recently, another tooth was found in a cave in Laos in Southeast Asia. Analysis showed it also belonged to a Denisovan, likely a young girl who lived there over 130,000 years ago. From the cold north of Siberia to the high-altitude plateau of Tibet to the tropical forests of Laos, this was not a small, isolated group. The Denisovans were widespread and incredibly adaptable. They thrived in all kinds of environments, just like our own ancestors. The story gets even stranger. The cave that gave them their name, Denisova Cave, wasn't just a home for them. It seems to have been a desirable piece of real estate for different human groups for millennia. Neanderthals lived there too. We know this from the bones and tools they left behind. And the genetic evidence showed something stunning. They weren't just neighbors. They were partners. In 2018, the analysis of another bone fragment from the cave, this one from a teenage girl, blew everyone's minds. Her genome showed she had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, a first-generation hybrid. This wasn't a statistical probability found by crunching numbers. This was her. One individual who was the direct offspring of two different kinds of humans. It was concrete proof that these groups were meeting and having children. The world of the past was not a world of segregated species. It was a world of interactions. Imagine a landscape where you might encounter people who looked quite different from you, but who you could still recognize as people and with whom you could have a family. It changes our whole picture of the past. This interbreeding wasn't just happening between Denisovans and Neanderthals. It happened with our ancestors Homo sapiens too. This is where the story of the Denisovans becomes our story. When scientists compared the Denisovan genome to the genomes of modern people from around the world, they found another surprise. There was no trace of Denisovan DNA in modern Africans. This makes sense, as Homo sapiens and Denisovans likely met after our ancestors left Africa. There were very low levels in Europeans and Asians, but when they looked at the genomes of people from Melanesia, people from places like Papua New Guinea, Australia, and nearby islands, they found something amazing. Up to 5% of their DNA is Denisovan. Let that sink in. A population of humans we didn't even know existed until a decade ago left a significant part of their genetic code in tens of millions of people alive today. This discovery explained a lot. It suggested that as modern humans spread out of Africa and across Asia, they met the Denisovans who were already living there. And just like with the Neanderthals, they didn't just replace them, they mixed with them. The Denisovans as a distinct group eventually disappeared, but their genetic echo lives on. This inheritance wasn't just random junk DNA. Some of these genes were clearly useful. They were passed on because they gave the new mixed population an advantage. The most famous example takes us back to that jawbone in Tibet. Modern Tibetans are masters of high-altitude living. They can thrive in low-oxygen environments that would make other people sick. Scientists discovered that they carry a special version of a gene called EPAS1 that helps their bodies manage oxygen in the blood more efficiently. And where did that gene variant come from? It came from the Denisovans. The story it tells is beautiful. The Denisovans lived on the Tibetan plateau for thousands of years, evolving adaptations to the harsh environment. Then, modern humans arrived. The newcomers were not well suited for life at 14,000 feet. But by interbreeding with the local Denisovans, their descendants inherited this genetic superpower. It was a shortcut to adaptation. Instead of waiting thousands of years for the right mutation to pop up, they got it ready-made from the people who had already put in the evolutionary work. The Denisovan jawbone wasn't just a fossil, it was a clue to a living genetic legacy. Other Denisovan genes found in modern humans seem to be related to the immune system. This also makes perfect sense. As modern humans moved into Asia, they would have encountered local diseases their African immune systems had never seen before. The Denisovans had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. Their immune systems were fine-tuned to fight off the local pathogens. By picking up some of their immune genes, modern humans got a crucial defense boost. It was like getting a software update for your immune system. The genetic story has one more layer of mystery. It seems the Denisovans have a ghost in their own past. When scientists looked closely at the Denisovan genome, they found stretches of DNA that were even more ancient and different. It didn't look like Neanderthal DNA or early modern human DNA. The best explanation is that the Denisovans themselves interbred with an even more archaic group of hominins. A super archaic population. This could have been a late surviving group of Homo erectus, or some other unknown human lineage that had been in Asia for 1 million years or more. It's ghost within a ghost. We have the genetic fingerprint of a population for which we have no fossils at all. It tells us that the human family tree is even more tangled and complex than we ever imagined. So, what did these people even look like? This is the hardest question to answer. With so few fossils, it's mostly guesswork, but genetics can offer some clues. By looking at something called DNA methylation, which acts like a set of switches that turn genes on and off, scientists can predict how certain genes might have been expressed. This method was tested on Neanderthals, where we have skeletons to check the predictions against, and it worked reasonably well. When applied to the Denisovans, the model predicts a person with a very wide, robust face. A broad pelvis, a large rib cage, big teeth, which we already knew from the fossils. In some ways, they might have looked similar to Neanderthals, who were also stocky and robust. But in other ways, they were different. Their faces were likely even wider. Their dental arch was longer. It's a fuzzy picture, a sketch, drawn with genetic data instead of a pencil. But it's more than we had before. We can start to imagine a person, not just a sequence of letters on a computer screen. We can picture them walking the cold steppes of Siberia or the high plateaus of Tibet. Why did they disappear? The same question hangs over the Neanderthals. There's no single, simple answer. It was likely a combination of factors. The climate was changing dramatically during the last ice age. And then a new, highly adaptable and fast-breeding group of humans showed up, our ancestors. The arrival of Homo sapiens in Asia likely put immense pressure on the Denisovans. We may have been better at hunting or better at forming large social networks. We may have brought new diseases. It was probably a slow process of competition and replacement. But replacement isn't the whole story. The genetic evidence shows us they weren't just wiped out. They were also absorbed. In every place where modern humans met them, it seems we had children with them. Their legacy didn't completely vanish. It became woven into our own. For people in Melanesia, a small but important part of their biology, their ability to fight disease, their adaptation to their environment, is a direct gift from these ghost-like people. The Denisovans didn't so much disappear as they dissolved into the larger human gene pool. The search for them is far from over. Scientists are now hunting for Denisovan DNA in the dirt of cave floors. It's a new technique called sediment DNA analysis. Even without bones, you can find the genetic traces of the people and animals who lived there. This could help us map out where the Denisovans lived, even in the absence of fossils. Other new methods, like paleoproteomics, the study of ancient proteins, could identify more fossils, like the Tibetan jawbone. Every year, the picture becomes a little less ghostly. We now have a jawbone, some teeth, a pinky, and a few other fragments. We have a full genome. We know they lived across a huge swath of Asia. We know they were adaptable. We know they were our cousins, close enough to have children with our own ancestors. They are a profound reminder that we are the last survivors of a once diverse human world. For most of our history, we shared the planet with other kinds of people. We were not alone. The Denisovans were real. They were a successful and widespread group of humans for hundreds of thousands of years. They had their own thoughts, their own families, their own ways of life. We may never know what they called themselves or what stories they told around their fires. But we know they were here, and for some of us they are still here, in the quiet, microscopic instructions that build our bodies and help us survive. They are the ghosts of our past, but they are also a living part of our present. The tiny bone from the Siberian cave opened a door to a lost world, a world that, it turns out, is still inside us.